Hey everyone, welcome to What Does That Piece Do? My name is Joe, and I've got something very special for you today. This is my first ever interview with a designer. So I'm very pleased to have along today Alex Knight. Alex is a teacher, he's a board game designer from Philadelphia. So his first published game is called Land and Freedom. It's the Spanish Civil War and Revolution, and it was just released on Blue Panther Games. So welcome to the channel, Alex.
Hey, Joe, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited. I've been following your channel and your instructional videos, and it's been great. So it's really fun to be on the channel.
Awesome. So you're the guinea pig here. First time I'm doing an interview. Let's see how this goes. But yeah, I wouldn't have you here if I wasn't hyped about the game. For the record, folks, we're probably going to have a teach on this game very soon. So it just got released and it should be hitting my doorstep soon. I hope. I can't wait to dig into it. I've been lucky enough to play test it with you once, so that's really
Yeah.
exciting. And also some other games, and we're going to get into those in a little bit. But first, I just want to start off by tell us about what your relationship is with analog and tabletop gaming. What games have you played in the past, and what's really grabbed your attention? What's your journey been like as you've discovered other games?
Yeah, I mean, nothing too outrageous. I've always been playing board games since I was a kid with my family, Monopoly and Risk and all the old classics. And I love those old games just from the standpoint of there's so much negotiation you can do. I love making a deal with my sister and getting the better of her and in some negotiation or haggling over Marvin Gardens or something like that. But then I'd say probably in the last 5 years, I've gotten more serious about board games. And one of the games that kind of was influential for me was Tammany Hall, which is basically a area control game where you have blind bidding. And I actually, this was 5 years ago, I got excited about it. And then I made my own sort of rules for an expansion, which I didn't ever publish or anything, but just to create some more depth, I guess, to that game. And that kind of put me on the path of, hey, what if I actually just did board game design like seriously for real? uh,
Right on. Cool. It's funny you mentioned Tammany Hall. I'm actually going to get an opportunity to, I think, play that for the first time next week.
oh
I've
wow.
got a fellow gamer that's been playing a lot of other games like we're talking about here, history games and that. But you mentioned that one is one of his favorites. So I'm like, okay, let's see if we can get that to the table. So that's funny. That's hilarious.
That's awesome.
Um,
If you want, I'll send you my. I created like character abilities so that each player has like different personality based on real people involved in Tammany Hall historically, and they each have different abilities that you can then use. It just gives a little bit more depth, I guess, to the game. So I'll send that your way.
okay, that's awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Be a great introduction. Is that really the point where you said like, hey, this is cool. I want to try this. I want to design games myself?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think I've been designing games on a small scale since I was a kid. I just have that kind of brain for it, I guess. But I never really got serious about it until, like I said, about 5 years ago. Um, and for me, when I was in school, I never liked school at all as a kid. I hated it. It was so boring. But we had like a few days I remember in junior high where like one of the teachers would create a game and we'd have to role play it or like be different, uh you know whatever the game was, but it was just like the idea that we could create something or the teacher could create something that would then allow players to learn something through play, allow the students to learn through play. And I think those were the days where I was like actually excited to go to school, excited to learn something, and it made a huge impression on me. Um, so, fast forward to 2018, after the Tammany Hall thing, I decided, oh, you know what? Like, if this is what I'm good at, if this is what I care about, I should really take this seriously and make it my main creative endeavor. Um, and so I got connected with the local game makers guild here in Philadelphia and started working on my Land and Freedom game, which at that time was extremely different from how it turned out. But that's kind of the genesis of how it happened.
Awesome. And yeah, we're going to talk about that Game Makers Guild. I'm really interested in that. So we'll get to that in a bit. It's funny though, you mentioned like gaming as a means of learning, and that's I think some of my early memories too. And they're mostly science-based games, science and nature
Hmm.
games. We had one in grade school. It was literally just called the survival game. I don't know if you had this, but we were all
No.
different creatures. You had like the herbivores, the omnivores, and the carnivores, and we all ran around the forest.
Yeah.
And we had like little tags that we had to, if a carnivore captured you, you could give them a tag, and then we see who survives the
Oh,
best. And then some people even got to be like weather and disease. It was pretty wild. And then there was
cool.
another game where we learned the evolution on a very basic level. It's like you take a bunch of white mice, you dump them onto a map where there's white and dark
Hmm.
areas, and then so you pick all the ones that stick out, and then you
Hmm.
change the map, and then you see how many become white and dark, and
Oh,
little
wow.
things like that. So not history though. Maybe I would have paid more attention in history class if we did fun stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about Land and Freedom then. So Land and Freedom, like you say, it's the Spanish Revolution Civil War. It's just coming out, people. It's available now at Blue Panther Games. So can you give us a quick synopsis overview of that game?
Yeah, really short elevator pitch version. It's basically a 1 to 3 player game. It's semi cooperative. It's 60 to 90 minutes, so it's very snappy. And it's all based on this idea of the fragile alliance. So you have the anarchists, the communists, and the moderates all working together against the fascists. The fascists are automated in the game. But then each of those players has their own political or revolutionary agenda that they're also pursuing at the same time that they're working together. So basically, the game is a balancing act where one side of the board is cooperative, the other side of the board is competitive, and every single turn, based on the card play, you're having to decide how much of your attention you're going to devote to the war effort for the cooperative side of the game or towards the political tracks to pursue your own individual agenda. And then one player always has the initiative. That player is going to get to add one of their tokens to the bag of glory. And at the end of the game, pulling tokens out of that bag is going to determine who wins the game if you don't get, destroyed by the fascists, which is entirely possible.
Yeah, it's a neat little balancing act. Like I say, I've had the opportunity to at least play test it once. Against the solo bot too. Me and another competitor got a little greedy, I gotta say, and I tanked it for us. So there's a lot to learn for me there. I'm looking forward to trying it more. So this is a very unique approach to. It's a topic that's been tackled by a bunch of other war games, which usually like head to head, fascists versus the nationalists versus the Republicans. So did you try to learn more about this conflict through other games that are already out there in the market and thought, I wish there was something different out there that told a different story?
So actually, it was the opposite. I when I started working on this game, I was still new to the board gaming hobby, and I didn't even know that there were games about the Spanish Civil War. Come to find out through the process of creating the game that there are a bunch of them actually, and um, I played a lot of them, and I read the rules for quite a lot of other ones, and unfortunately, I didn't. Most of them I thought were pretty boring because they are, like you said, basically just a war game where it's 2 players, good versus evil kind of thing, and just totally neglects the whole revolutionary political side of the conflict, which is what's really fascinating about the Spanish Civil War, in my opinion. So, uh, luckily, I guess the game that I was creating was already quite different from many of the games that existed out there. Um, and then, yeah, I was able to pitch it to Blue Panther last summer, and luckily they were interested right away, and I've been able to work with a really good developer in Ryan Heilman, and then the artist Jose Faura, who's Spanish, and he's done a great job. So the game looks really great.
Awesome. So that's interesting. So you had the topic in mind and thought, hey, how can I show this side of the conflict here through a game rather than through games that touch on the topic and then try to create your own. Okay, so that's interesting. So then, what was your research journey like on this topic? So you obviously already had a keen interest in this conflict before you got into it. So yeah, what were some of your research sources and what did you lean on for that?
Yeah, I mean, going back to when I first got fascinated by the Spanish Civil War, it was in 2007 when I read George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia. And I was living in Venezuela at the time, and there was a little bit of a parallel between me and Orwell in that I was this English speaking foreign traveler in a Spanish-speaking country that was undergoing a bit of a revolution at the time, with Chavez being in power in Venezuela. And um, that's kind of what brought me to Venezuela. Was I was curious about this whole anti-imperial struggle that was going on. Of course, the Iraq War was the big thing at the time. Um, and living in Venezuela, I was, a little bit disappointed, I guess, by what I maybe hoped that I was going to see in terms of the popular power that was going on there. And so reading Orwell was like, time traveling to another time that was an even more dramatic example of that. And, uh, obviously Orwell experienced this whole dynamic that the game is based on, of the fragile anti-fascist alliance, where the different political factions are having to work together against this imminent doom of these fascists who are being supplied by Germany and Italy. But then behind the lines, Orwell saw firsthand the betrayal of the revolution and all the political infighting, which cost the republic ultimately, and doomed them. Um, so that was the original fascination for me. Um, since then, of course, I've read a bunch of other great books, and the movie Land and Freedom that Ken Loach made in '95 is fantastic as well. But if I could shout out one more book, I would have to go with Anarchists in the Spanish Revolution, the Jose Perat's first-hand account / historical perspective of what happened there. He was a participant in the CNT, and it's a really fantastic book.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm all for reading books on the topics to get to know the situation a bit better, and I think some of the viewers are. We'll drop links to those books and those recommendations in
Yeah,
the description, by the way. So that's interesting. The parallels then you saw between what was going on, what happened in Spain in the 30s, and what you're seeing in Venezuela. When was that? Was that the early mid 2000s in Venezuela?
yeah. 2006,
Yeah.
2007, I was there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So yeah, you saw a lot of parallels there. And are there any other parallels you've seen through the 20th century or even today? This infighting of what could be a great revolutionary movement, but these forces kind of that are supposed to be working together, just kind of dragging each other down.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it repeatedly in every like activist or organizing I've been involved in, any movement building I've been involved in. You're always going to have that dynamic of having to work with people that you don't totally agree with politically, people that maybe share 50% of your politics or 10% or whatever, but like there's a larger goal that you're working towards, and so you have to find some common ground. And the extent to which people are able to do that can often determine if a campaign is going to be successful or not. So it's a dynamic that you're going to see over and over if you're involved in any kind of movement for social change.
Yeah, and I've seen it myself too. Like even just recently, there were some teacher strikes and workers' movements here
Yeah,
in my city. I went over to Queens Park where the big protests are. It's interesting to see the little booths set up with all these different. Oh, you got the workers group, you've got the communist group, the socialist group, and they don't seem to hang out and talk to each other that much, which is kind of disappointing. There's
yeah,
just enough ideological differences. We're like, you know what? Well, we're gonna go do our thing over here. So it can be really frustrating. It's don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
right.
Like work with what you got, and hopefully there's a bit more solidarity there amongst the groups. So now going back to the Spanish Civil War and Revolution, so you focus on a lot of these other moving pieces within this conflict that are mostly on that one side. Ideally, it's not just the strength of arms and the number of forces necessarily, but the people involved. So you've got individual cards that reference things like the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, so those are the black soldiers that came from America to help with the effort there, and a lot of women involved in the fight. So was it really important for you that the players that engage with this game gain an understanding of these lesser known revolutionaries?
Yeah, I mean that's my goal as a designer. I want to inspire players through the efforts and sacrifices of regular people striving for social change, whether historically or today. And in this game, my hope is that people will engage with the stories and the characters of everyone who participated in the Spanish Civil War. And just picking out one card as an example, I have a card about Paul Robeson, who was a African American actor and singer, and yeah, in the 1930s, he was maybe the most famous black person in the world. Um, and he was getting radicalized at the same time that the Spanish Civil War was going on. So he went to Spain and he sang to try to entertain the troops in the Republican side at the trenches, and went to hospitals to sing for the wounded soldiers. And this was ultimately, it cost him his fame, because he later was heavily targeted by the U.S. government during the McCarthy era of the 40s and 50s. He couldn't leave the country. He couldn't perform anywhere in public because he was criticizing U.S. foreign policy at the time. And uh, today, the Paul Robeson house is close to my home in West Philadelphia. That's where he spent his last years living at his sister's house in poverty. That's just an example where it's like, how much did Paul Robeson really affect the outcome of the Spanish Civil War? Not very much. But I thought it was an important card to include because it just sort of illustrates how this famous black man risked his celebrity and his reputation to take a stand against fascism. And, you know, he was doing it at the same time that the US government was actively ignoring this conflict, and even U.S. corporations like Texaco and Ford were supplying aid to the fascist army. Um, so yeah, my goal is hopefully to connect with players, with the characters and the stories of those involved in the game, and also to hopefully inspire them that regular people can make change in society.
For people that have watched my videos before, I mean, you might recall too, every time I'm doing one of these and looking at the historical figures, I like to focus on one piece and call, this piece changes history. And I like to think of, okay, what is that one piece that maybe would have affected the outcome or would have affected, you know, how we're talking about it today. Do you believe there's any one piece or one character or one central element to this conflict that would be the piece that changes history here?
It's hard to pick one. I mean, it's been said many times, but the outcome of the Spanish Civil War wasn't really determined so much in the trenches in Spain as much as it was determined in London and Paris and Washington, and their naval blockade that they put on the Spanish Republic to prevent the Republic from receiving arms, just led to the stranglehold that the fascists were ultimately able to put on. So I guess if there is any one thing you could point to, you would say the total lack of foreign aid in reality, other than the Soviet Union and Mexico, basically. Yeah, I mean, in the game, it's a slight diversion from reality in that you can actually receive foreign aid from the French and the British and the Americans. The moderate player in particular is determined to do that and benefits greatly by getting that foreign aid. Yeah, that's one little aspect of the game that could have made a huge difference in reality.
Interesting. So that's you kind of firing up the what if machine for this,
Right.
as if, hey, some of the aid did actually flow in properly. All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then let's go back to the guild that you were part of, the Game Designers Guild in Philadelphia. Make sure you get the name of it right. I probably don't have it right there, but you got a lot of guidance from the folks there and get some design tips and ideas. Can you talk about how you got involved and what the brainstorming and ideas exchange looks like with other members of this group?
Yeah, I think you got it right. It's a Game Makers Guild. It's awesome. But basically, I just shout out the people involved. Nicole and Anthony Amato, they first got me involved. Um Jay Vowles, James Fernhaber. A lot of these people have now published games, which are really awesome. John Perry has a game called Air, Land, and Sea. Henry Audubon has a game called Parks, and a number of other games which are quite popular. T.L. Simons and Greg Loring Albright, they did Block by Block. All these people have been really influential in me in developing my skills as a designer and learning how to see the games as, maximizing the fun and enjoyment of the players. Um, and basically, how it works is we have a monthly online playtest at this point. Used to be before the pandemic, it was in person. We're still kind of working on getting back to having a regular scheduled in person testing event, but we do it occasionally. Um, but yeah, I mean, the inspiration and I guess training in a sense that I've received from these other game designers uh, is invaluable, because without that, I would have no chance of putting together a game this good.
Awesome. That's some heavy hitters, the names you mentioned there. Like I didn't realize folks from these yeah, pretty well-known games. I know Parks,
Yeah.
Airline Sea. Of course, I know Block by Block too. I've actually been talking to TL about having a conversation like this as well too. So that's really exciting. So yeah, it's really great. Sort of an incubation place for you folks to all exchange ideas and release these amazing games. So speaking of games, though, I know there are some other ones you're working on. Land of Freedom just released, but there's some others in the hopper. One other one I got to test once at least. We got through a round or two. It was really wild, really awesome. It's about the Soviet Revolution, and it was called Hammer and Sickle. And can you give a quick synopsis of that one and how development is going with that game?
Yeah, Hammer and Sickle, probably my favorite game of my own to play. It's an asymmetrical game about the Russian Civil War, so 1918 to 21. And you have two revolutionary factions in the anarchists and the Bolsheviks versus the two counter-revolutionary factions of the New Nations and the Whites. And then each faction has their own unique tokens and abilities. The anarchists are spreading agitation around the board and trying to basically rile up the populace to throw off the oppressive regimes. The Bolsheviks have armored trains, which are a really powerful super weapon that they can use to win battles. The new nations have nationalism, which they can put around on the board to try to further independence in different regions. And then the whites have terror, which they're gaining through conquering territories, and then they can use that terror to put down agitation or unrest, and also to get certain advantages. So each player has their own unique tokens, and then in addition to that, they have different objectives and event cards. And it's kind of a really slick thing where the events are tied in with turn order and all the tiebreakers in a very unique, simple, elegant way. So it's a really fun game. It's a big sort of cubes on a map game compared to Land and Freedom. It's a longer game, but it does have a relatively simple rule set that actually goes back in inspiration to Tammany Hall in a way because of the blind bidding for control over certain territories, and it also draws a lot of inspiration from the Game of Thrones board game originally. Right now, it's sort of in the GMT orbit. I'm working with a really great developer, Joe Dewhurst, who you might know. And the goal is to get that on the P500 for GMT. So it's GMT can be a little bit of a deliberate approach. It may be a couple of years before it actually gets out into the world, but I think it's in good hands right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that just the time and the effort that they put into all the development, yeah, they take a while, but when they come out, it's worth it. Absolutely. So I think you're very lucky to have Joe in your camp there,
Yeah.
Joe D. Yeah, definitely heard that name, and he's been behind a lot of great releases in the past couple of years. So yeah, really excited to see that one see the light of the day. There's another game I believe you're working on, something on John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, so that one is currently unsigned. So any publishers out there, hit me up. But it's a cooperative campaign game that follows John Brown's quest to gather money and weapons and soldiers uh, to risk their lives to try to launch a raid into the South in 1859 to bring slavery to an end. So there's 8 different scenarios in the game, and you basically one scenario builds on the next. So it's a little bit of a legacy light kind of a thing where you're gaining new powers and characters and locations on the map from one campaign or one mission to the next, basically. But within the game, it's not at all like the other games I have because it's not remotely a war game or anything. It's more of a cat and mouse thing where the U.S. Marshals are trying to catch you or to locate John Brown and disrupt your plans, and you have to accumulate aliases so that John Brown can avoid capture. Sort of like these are not the abolitionists you're looking for. Here's an alias, um, and there's some push your luck element as well. Um, but it's totally different kind of a game. But again, I'm trying to bring to light all the different regular people who are involved in the radical abolitionist movement, who you might not have heard of, who are risked their lives and in many cases died. And then along with that, I'm also working on a role playing game to accompany that board game. And basically, the role playing game dives into the possibilities of the raid itself in Harper's Ferry. And so within that, you have room for all the alternate histories and exploring all the contradictions of, this northern white man who's, you know, going down to the south to sacrifice his life and the lives of all these other people, to try to save black people in the South. So there's a lot of contradictions there to explore, and I think the best way to do that is probably a role playing game. So that's kind of my idea, is that it's almost like an add on potentially, like for Kickstarter, or even maybe a sequel, because it is so different from the actual board game.
So it's very prolific. You got a lot of ideas in the hopper, and even one more I think we could talk about just briefly too. A game that's on labor movements called Strike.
Yeah, so this one is signed, and I'm not sure exactly how much I can say about it publicly yet, but basically it's based on the recent organizing of Amazon Labor Union, Starbucks Workers Union, and others. So it's more current events basically, but it's a cooperative card game, pretty quick card game about coworkers organizing their workplace to go on strike, and fingers crossed should be out in the world within a year or two.
Oh wow. Okay, so you're just plowing along with these ideas. They're just flowing ever since Tammany Hall. Then the ideas are coming out here. But I think it's really interesting. I'm starting to sense a theme here by now. Like I knew about these games already, but you see that theme start to come through, that you seem to be addressing things like social justice, political activism, and you mentioned it already that you've had a passes in activism. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Me personally, I really found myself through organizing and activism, starting when I was in college. It just meant the world to me. I kind of came out of my shell and became a really actualized person in the world. And I think that organizing has that ability to empower people. There's a really great book called "I've Got the Light of Freedom" about SNCC during the Black Freedom Movement. Um, and that book talks about leadership development, self empowerment of oppressed communities, and participatory democracy, really pushed by Ella Baker, who famously said that strong people don't need strong leaders. So the idea there is that um, people become empowered through organizing. And if you have a basis of democracy or participatory democracy, that people can have a say in the decisions that affect them, that's a means for them to become empowered. And then you don't need any kind of hierarchical leader telling everyone what to do or speaking on behalf of the movement. Um, so that's really made a huge impression on me personally. Um, Later on, I was involved in the Occupy Wall Street movement, and I was a facilitator in the General Assembly. And, we would have assemblies of hundreds or thousands of people where you're trying to make a decision about what the movement needs to do. And the goal, is to try to create a space where people can actually become empowered collectively to have a say in those decisions. Um, and I really, I'm a believer in radical democracy. So that's made a huge influence on me personally.
That's interesting. I love that idea of the books you're reading, and the ideas coming from these leaders to be like participatory democracy, as you said.
Yeah.
You hear it so often when something goes on in politics where certain policies are put through and people don't agree with them, or politicians are off doing whatever, and then you hear when the voting time comes around, elections come around, it's like, well, you got to vote, because if you don't vote, you can't complain. And I'd like to think that democracy is more than just voting every 4 years or so and complaining. Like there's got to be something in between, right? And I really love that idea. But maybe I can ask though, like it's got to be tough sometimes when you do want to see positive change, and you're so paralyzed by what do I do? How do I get involved? Like, do you have any advice for someone that maybe wants to get involved but doesn't even know where to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to start where you are. So if you're a student, you start at your school. If you're a worker, you start at your workplace. If you're a neighbor, you start in your neighborhood. It's really about finding like-minded people, or at least people that share the same circumstances as you, and then beginning to try to advocate for yourselves as a group. Um, yeah, I mean, it's just the old cliches of, a fist is much stronger than five fingers. So you got to really come together with people, and it's that process of, creating democracy through sort of self empowerment or the empowerment of the group, that I think makes change possible, because there's really nothing you can do as an individual. I really believe that.
And hey, when you come together, don't let those slightest, smallest differences push you apart and then be all fractured again, as we've seen with what we were talking about earlier, right?
Absolutely, but at the same time, you know, what I like about Land and Freedom is that you have to do both, right? It's not the lesson isn't like just ignore the differences that you have with, whatever other political, faction or whatever. You have to pursue your own political agenda at the same time as you're working together with the collective, coalition, or alliance. Um, and that's it's kind of this thing of, when things get tough, it's easy to retreat and just, become deactivated. But really, you have to do more. You have to do both. You have to pursue, the team collective agenda, as well as your own, you know selfish agendas as a faction or as an individual. um, and yeah, I mean, one of the things I was thinking about is like, other topics that could have these kind of games. And I'm sure there are plenty of people that are working on lots of interesting games, or some games that I don't even know that probably already exist. But um, I mentioned the film Land of Freedom that Ken Loach made about the topic of the Spanish Civil War. My wife and I just the other night watched another of his films, Ken Loach's films, "The Wind That Shakes the Barley," about the Irish War of Independence and in the Irish Civil War that followed it, between the pro-treaty and the anti-treaty, combatants. And yeah, I think, that's one example of a time where you have this fragile alliance, and the only way forward is you have to do both. You have to pursue, in that case, it's, well, we got to get the British out of, dominating our island. But at the same time, if you're, in that movie, it's basically people who are more socialist minded saying, well, we also need to have a change in who owns this island. It's not enough to just kick the British flag out and then replace it with an Irish flag and expect anything to change. You also have to pursue that, more social minded agenda. So that's kind of the point I'm trying to make, is that it's not enough to just do one or the other. You actually have to do both.
Right, and kind of bringing it back to games is like, what's the idea of victory here? What's the objective? Have you won, or have you at least made progress, right? And I myself, and I'm sure a lot of others, we like to game for fun because it's fun to engage with the models and do all these wonderful things. And but I also like to gain an understanding of something, either of a system or power dynamics or history. And so I'd like to ask them, based on all these games that you're looking at, do you think this is a good way, like engaging with games, analog games especially? Is it a good way for people to understand power dynamics and social justice? Is that your intent with some of these games?
Absolutely. I mean, but not just to understand the power dynamics, but also to be inspired, hopefully, with the understanding that regular people, like we're talking about, when they are organized, can have a really huge positive impact in society and history. And that's something that you're not likely to get taught in school, as you mentioned. So, um, you know, trying to create games where you can engage with those times or those places where those, regular groups of people got together and actually had huge effects in the world. It's really easy, obviously, to get demoralized by the news, what's going on in the world, and just feel like, oh, what's the point? But the first step is really just to believe that you actually have the power to make a difference. Because if you don't have that belief, you're not going to do anything. So, um, like we're talking about, if you come together with your fellow students, fellow workers, fellow neighbors, whatever, community members, that's when you start to believe, hey, actually, maybe we do have some power here. And I mean, what you're asking is a great question, because I don't know the answer. How much can a board game actually inspire people to want to make change in society, or actually believe that they can do that? I don't know the answer to that. But my hope is that if I expose people to these times of radical history and these kinds of ideas that people at the time were involved with, whether it's Paul Robeson or the Mujeres Libres or all these different people, and even really through the mechanics of the game, like we're talking about with this Fragile Alliance, to sort of demonstrate some of the dynamics of what it's like to be involved in social change and be involved in coalition building and all that kind of stuff. Then you know maybe that's what I can do. But at the very least, I'm creating something hopefully that's fun and that people can engage with. That probably they're more likely to engage with a fun game than they are with me writing an essay or giving a speech or something like that to try to prove a point. Um, because like I said in the very beginning, like the best education I ever got in school was when we were playing games. When you can engage with a system and become a participant in the storytelling that you're doing there. That's much more powerful, I think, than any lecture I ever heard from a professor.
Awesome. I love inspire, games that hopefully inspire. That
Yeah.
is a really interesting way to look at it. So then, speaking of that, are there any games that you've played by other designers recently that inspire you in this way that you hope you can inspire people?
Wow. Um, yeah, I mean, there's too many. I think probably your channel has covered a few of them. The 1979 Revolution in Iran game, Dan Bullock. Uh, Later tonight, I'm going to play for the first time Days of Ire about the Hungarian Revolution in 1956. But there's so many other games that are coming out recently. It seems like there is this kind of revolution in board games happening where people are coming out with games about, radical history, whether it's the Haitian Revolution or, the anti-colonial struggles in Puerto Rico. I mean, there's so many different topics that it seems like the past couple of years, 2, 3 years, Stonewall Uprising, another one about the gay civil rights movement, that it really is inspiring that there are. It does seem like a trend that there is more social struggle minded board game designers coming together and putting out some really interesting topics. That it's really exciting to be one small part of that.
Right on. And yeah, those the few that you mentioned too. Like those are some of the ones off the top of my head. Or you reminded me of Days of Ire. I haven't played that yet. I have Knights of Fire, though, the kind of the sequel to
Right.
that. So we get that, and Votes for Women is a really interesting one that I've
Yeah.
seen that I've just managed to get my hands on too. But yeah, a lot of these other ones, 1979 is pretty inspiring. I would say the one that's opened my eyes the most, especially for an engaging model, recently is Gandhi. I'm not
Oh,
sure if
really?
you're into the coin games, but the model, the story that comes through in that is like once it starts to click, it's a pretty complicated game, but once it starts to click, I'm just like, wow, just wrapping your idea,
Hmm.
you're wrapping your brain around the idea of non-cooperation and non-violence
Yeah.
as opposed to violence and then the impacts of that, but like how do you need to prepare for that to be effective? I thought was really powerful. So that's what I'll recommend too if you haven't checked it out yet.
No, I haven't played it yet, but
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, there's so many games now. It's like,
I know.
wow, yeah, when can I get my hands on these games? It's really cool.
On top of all the designing work you're doing. So, yeah, busy times for all of us. Exciting times. I think you're right though. There's a lot of new stuff that's happening, especially in the past couple of years. It's kind of awakening of like, hey, what else can we explore here? That's not just farming in the Middle Ages and wars with tanks and stuff. So, I think
Yeah.
we're talking about the golden age of board gaming. I think we might be in the golden age of revolutionary board gaming. So, we'll see what the next few years hold.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we're just at the very beginning of that, right? I mean, I think there's probably going to be lots of content for your channel coming up in the next few years, with all these games coming out.
Yeah, cool. Sounds like we're both going to be busy. So, speaking of being busy, I can't thank you enough. This is the weekend
Uh,
where Blue Panther games is just starting to ship out. Land in Freedom, Spanish Revolution, Civil War, by our man Alex Knight here. So I'm sure you're pretty excited, pretty busy guy. I'm glad you could spend this time with us, and hope to see you at the table one day.
Absolutely. BluePantherLLC.com to get your copy. Thanks so much, Joe, for having me.
All right, thank you, Alex.